Hi, friends, and welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I'm your host, Christy Keating. In this podcast, we talk about it all, our parenting, our partnering, and our professional lives, because they are all a part of us, and we were never meant to do this alone. Hey, friends, welcome back to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I am, as always, so thrilled and grateful to have you here. Whether you are a brand new listener, a longtime loyal listener, or, an every now and then kind of listener. I love that you have decided to use your time, your energy to join me here on the podcast and to enter this space of curiosity, learning, and respect, right? Because I think that's what, at the core, that's what parenting is all about. And that is certainly what today's conversation is all about. I'm so thrilled to be able to introduce you today to my friend, my colleague, and someone I've been working to get on the podcast for a while, but we were not having success with our schedules aligning, and we finally made it happen. And I think you are really going to love listening to and hearing from Yolanda Williams, especially if you stay in that space of curiosity, learning, and respect today. Yolanda is an incredible conscious parenting coach, a social justice instructor, and most importantly, a single mom to one amazing daughter. Yolanda works to empower parents with tools to be more intentional, conscious parents in order to raise the next generation of emotionally well, liberated, free thinkers, and in the process form deeper, more intentional relationships with their children. Through her podcast, conferences, webinars, and writings, Yolanda curates critical and candid conversations about race, social justice, and parenting with authenticity, truth, and compassion. And she helps people find tangible tools to create personal and collective transformation. Yolanda provides coaching, DEI training for educators, and so much more. And you can find out all about her on her website, which is parentingdecolonized.com. That link and others are in the show notes. And what I love about this conversation is, as I said, the space that Yolanda invites us into to think about things that are maybe uncomfortable, or as she said, maybe that we get tired of thinking about, but that are so, so critical if we want to build, as I always talk about, a world that is safe, a place where all of our children, your children, my children, all of our children can grow up both brain safe and body safe, which is really the mission behind the podcast and behind all of the work done at the Heartful Parent Collective. Yolanda and I are in synchronicity there, and I'm so excited to share this conversation with you. And so without further ado, Yolanda Williams. Oh, Yolanda, we have finally made it happen. Welcome to the podcast.
Yes, super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to dive into this conversation. As you know from our conversations when we're not recording, I've been following your work for some time. I think it's such important work that you are doing in the world. And there's a lot of synergy between sort of our philosophies and our approach with parenting. But obviously you have a different lens and a different angle that you work with. And I want to dive into that today. And maybe you can just start by sharing with listeners a little bit about how you got into what you're doing, how you started Parenting Decolonized, and what it's all about.
Yeah, so, I am 43 years old now, and I have a 6-year-old. So I did not think I was ever going to have children. I actually did not like children. I did not want to, I was one of those really toxic child-free people. I was really content to be the bougie auntie with my passport getting stamped, like just, living as an expat in Belize. Like that was my dream. Okay. So when I found that I was pregnant at 36, I was also living with my friends. So technically houseless out in California and broke, no job. I was like, what the hell? Do I even want to have this kid? That was the first question. And the second one, after I finally was like, okay, I'm having this kid, was how am I going to raise her, or it at that point.
Right.
And so I was really, I like studied. The first book I bought was Brain Rules for Baby. And
So good.
I love that book.
I did too.
Opened up like, okay, they started talking about discipline. And I was like, and the brain science and all this stuff. And so that's when I started looking into like positive discipline and gentle parenting. And I started joining Facebook groups to learn more. I bought more books. I found people like L.R. Nost and, Dr. Shafali was somebody I followed in the very beginning. And so I joined all these groups and they were very white, white-led group, lots of white women. And there was no room for me in there to discuss the nuances of what it means to be a gentle parent and a Black parent in the United States that's largely anti-Black. And so I was like, I don't feel safe here because whenever I bring up race, I got attacked for it. So I left those groups. I found a Black gentle parenting group that also didn't feel safe. It felt like just more of the same, but Black. And I was becoming more and more radicalized as I started reading about conscious parenting, about trying to connect the dots between Black people, enslavement, colonialism. And so I was just reading a whole lot more and starting to look into decolonizing. And once I did that, gentle parenting just wasn't enough for me. I felt like it was too, and this is going to sound weird, it was too child-centric and it did not discuss parents enough, right?
Yes.
So the basis we know of gentle parenting is respect, right? And that's awesome. Respect for your child. Your child is a human being. They are autonomous. They have agency. You need to treat them with respect. However, I found that there was not enough room to discuss why parents act the way they do and the underlying roots of even why we have a job. Like, why are we coaches? What is that?
Right.
Why are there parent coaches anyway? Why does it exist, right? So not having that discussion of why there's even a need for this industry, which is the white capitalist patriarchy, and not doing that work is why I started my podcast at the time. It's called Parenting Decolonized, but I stopped doing it for a little bit. And I started really just writing and getting on social media and discussing like the things that most people weren't discussing in the parent coaching, parent educator industry, because I wanted to shine the light on the underlying roots and the why of all of it, not just how we, can stop this child from throwing a tantrum, why the parents are throwing a tantrum. What's going on systemically? What happens when parents aren't supported? Like I wanted to have those discussions, and that's how I started Parents Decolonized.
I love that. I mean, I guess love isn't the right word. I appreciate that journey, and I particularly appreciate the recognition because that there were all these different parenting spaces that didn't feel safe because a really big piece of who you are as a human and as a parent, you weren't allowed to talk about in those spaces. And I guess I would love to start with, I don't know how many years ago was that, Yolanda, that you
about 5.
Okay. So, because I'm wondering if you've seen any shift in that, given sort of the I guess reckoning, if you will, that we saw happen during COVID with the murder of George Floyd and so many others, and frankly a recognition by folks like me, right, white folks, which was long overdue, but a recognition that there is more to this than maybe was previously recognized or acknowledged or that we were willing to talk about. Have you noticed any sort of a shift, or are we still stuck in the same mud?
It's this SSDD. If you're a Stephen King fan, you know what that means. Same shit, different day. It's the same and different at the same time. So you did see where people were like, their eyes are open. We're talking about this more, right? But then there's this thing that happens where white folks get exhausted very easily from talking about social justice and racial justice issues. Don't want to discuss it anymore.
Yeah.
That, and then there's people who have went from gentle parenting, and now we're going to call ourselves conscious parenting. Well, the problem is that the people who initially started really just making that distinction between gentle parenting and conscious parenting were largely Black and brown people. And the reason that we had to do that was because systemically we had to recognize ourselves as parents and look at like, what is happening with us? The history, like historical context matters. What's happening right now politically matters. Also, systemically, what's going on in our individual lives, that all matters. We got to be conscious of all of these things, as well as our trauma, as well as our mindset and mood. Like that's where the conscious parenting. So I'm seeing this shift from this gentle parenting to conscious parenting. The problem is that it's still really individualistic if you aren't, because gentle parenting, I'm sorry, it feels very individualistic to me. Conscious parenting, you care about not just what's happening in your family unit. The whole point is that you are parenting for liberation for the world.
Yes.
But you just don't think about it that large, right? It's just like, I'm teaching my daughter how to resist by parenting in a way that helps her do that, right? So I'm conscious of when she says no to me, what comes up in me, right? Yeah. Because I want her to say no to the adult who's trying to abuse her or who's trying to lie to her. I want her to be able to call that out, but she has to be able to call me out, and I have to deal with what comes up when that happens, because it comes up, y'all. Okay,
yes,
I'm not perfect. So when my daughter's Gia, she's 6, but she's also autistic, so she has some developmental delays, and she's starting now at 6 the very rebellious no phase of 2 and 3-year-olds. Child, I'm over here just like, what did you just say? I said, what did I tell you? And she was like, nothing. All I can do is laugh. I was like, girl, you are so funny. So, so you're not just parenting for yourself, you're parenting because if you think about what parenting is supposed to be, it's supposed to be a communal thing. We're not supposed to be just siloed off in our respective homes and parenting just for our family. Like, look, my child, I'm a gentle parent and they are respected, blah, 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 blah. But does your child respect other people? Do they know about race, about gender, about ableism? Like, what are you actually teaching? Because I just find that just saying, let's just talk about respect is not enough, especially with white children.
Yes.
Sorry. The power dynamics when it comes to race, y'all have to be willing to discuss that and teach your children about that, because when I'm out on the playground and something happens, I'm seeing the power dynamic in action. But the kids don't know what's going on and they don't mean it. I'm not saying your child is racist. I'm saying that there is inherent what am I trying to say? An inherent like power dynamic.
Yeah.
Because of the racialized society that we live in. And they need to be aware of it, because I'm teaching my daughter about it. And it shouldn't just be on me just to be talking about race in my home.
Well, no, I mean, okay, first of all, I think I heard the words, I'm sorry, come out of your mouth. And you didn't
I'm really not.
Right? Like there's nothing to apologize
I'm absolutely not sorry.
for at all. But what I heard you say that really resonated for me, sort of like backing up a little bit, was this idea that white people get tired. Like that, you've seen that, like that white people get tired of talking about this.
Something, I forget what it's called, but yeah.
Yeah, I know. And you're right. It is called something. I don't
something
remember.
Fatigue. Activism fatigue, something fatigue.
Yeah. And the challenge though is, as you just said, then if we are not willing to continue these conversations and continue talking about these things, then my white child doesn't know the things that they need to know to help keep all of their classmates, all of their peers, your child, every child safe. And that's, I have a belief, and anyone who's listened to this podcast for any length of time knows I talk about the idea that I believe all of our children have the right to grow up brain safe and body safe, right? Which is I don't know, hopefully that makes sense to people. That's a phrase I came up with, but like they deserve to grow up. Yeah. Obviously their bodies, not violated in any way, but also their brains safe and feeling like they have belonging and significance in the world, which is something we talk about in positive discipline, right? And we can't do that if I'm not also raising my child to support your child and vice versa, right? Like that they are recognizing the community that they're in. So I love that you are calling that out for us, because, we are 4 years past sort of the events of COVID and the murder of George Floyd and all that conversation. And we need to keep this conversation happening.
Well, we see what happens. We've seen the backlash, right? You see the backlash after Obama was elected. We see that politically. There was they call it a white lash. People just angry, like, how dare this Black person be president? We see what's happening now after the 2020 uprising. Right. And that is a whole lot of backtracking from companies and from the United States government around DEI, around keeping people safe, around police reform. And again, that's not just people being tired. That's an actual targeted, like, no, we are not doing this with y'all. You are at the bottom of the racial caste system and you need to stay there. Like, that's actively what it is. And so not having these conversations is contributing to that. That's the thing. Yeah. And I was telling someone, I was like, as a white parent, you get the privilege. That's where the word privilege comes from, to not have to have this conversation unless it directly affects you. If you're a white parent with a Black child, you might be having this conversation. But if you have white children and you don't have any Black relatives, you probably don't even think about it. That's where the privilege comes in, because you don't have to, right? It doesn't affect you directly. But that's the problem. That's where the individualism comes in, which is a supremacy culture trait, where you just have to worry about you. And I don't know how to tell y'all that you have to care about other people. Like, you have to care about more than just your family, because that's, as we're seeing what's happening with women's reproductive rights, like, the government does not discriminate. It feels like it does, because it does. But when it comes to certain issues, everyone gets targeted. We're seeing targeted stuff with the LGBTQIA plus community.
Yep.
There's a lot of people in that, a lot of races, a lot of genders. Like, the government is just like, nope, we're targeting that particular segment of people. You have to care about that, because I'm telling you, it's not going to stop. It doesn't just stop at us. It doesn't just stop at them. The point is for everyone to just be working for the elite, for the rich. So when you start to have these conversations, this is me going down a whole, this is what I do.
I love it. Keep going. Keep going.
Once we start connecting dots and start thinking more systemically, we see how all of this is interconnected and interdependent. So the moment you disrupt that, and you just saying to your child, hey, I tell parents all the time, just do a little test, because you need to know what they already think, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're watching, like, say, Daniel Tiger, there's a little Black boy named Max on there. Hey, what do you think about Max? Do you notice anything different about Max? And if they're not noticing skin color, and you're like, great, they don't see race. That's not good. Race is okay. It's okay that you're white. Right. It's okay that I'm Black. We're not trying to erase race. Race is a made up social construct, but there's real consequences to it, right? And I love being Black. And so I'm not trying to say, like, don't see race. Your kids have to see it. The only way for there to be equity is if we see it and we're just like, I see you and it doesn't matter.
Yes.
Like, that's, I see you and I appreciate this culture. I see you and I'm not trying to steal and appropriate, I can appreciate, like that's what we need to be teaching our children.
I love that you bring that issue up of how we need to be talking about race and that we're not trying to not see it. Because, you mentioned that the book, Brain Rules for Baby, which was, I think, the first parenting book that I read as well. And I loved it. I still on my shelf. But one of the second books, I think the second book that I read was called Nurture Shock. I don't know if you've ever read it, but it's by Poe Bronson and Ashley Merriman, I think. And in that, there is an entire chapter on the way that white parents, I should say, I was going to say talk, but really don't talk about race, and why we need it. It was really laying out the research and how important it is that we are talking about race, and that we are having those conversations. And then I had the opportunity, as a part of my Safe Parenting Summit in 2023, to interview Dr. Jennifer Harvey, who wrote a book called Raising White Kids, which is a phenomenal book for white parents about how to have these conversations. So I love that you're saying, I just think the more times we all hear the importance of these conversations.
Yeah, but the problem is that it feels, you can say it, people won't listen to me. So it really is up to the white parent coaches to actually be talking to your audiences and having these conversations with your audience. Because when I say it, it's like, oh, this Black person is bringing up race again. So it's different, right? And it annoys the shit out of me, but it's the reality of the situation. I didn't read Robin DiAngelo's book. I don't need her to tell me what's going on with white people.
Yeah.
But a lot of white people needed that entry, right? They needed that entry into, and they needed that white woman to tell them what's going on. That annoyed me, but it is what it is. So I'm just like, use your platforms to put this message out there, because we see, like, it's uncomfortable, but what makes it uncomfortable for you? Like, ask yourself that. If you're talking to your child and race comes up and you're like, you don't want to say the word white and you don't want to say the word Black, what is that? Because it exists and it's okay. Like, you have to start investigating what makes you uncomfortable about it, and start looking at, a lot of white people call themselves anti-racist, but that's an action. You can't call yourself anti-racist if you're not actually talking about race with your kids, with your community, with your families. You are non-racist. That just means I don't like racism. Great. Like, that doesn't help me. So because you can perpetuate racism without even knowing you're even doing it.
Yeah.
That's and part of a part of racism is color blindness, because to say, my kids don't see color, I don't want my child to think there's something wrong with them. Why would they think that? Unless you're identifying with racism, because whiteness is a construct, but white people don't have to necessarily subscribe to whiteness. That's why you've got to start listening to folks and following them and understanding the difference.
Yeah. I love the way that you said that if we are encouraging our children to not see color, to not see race, what we are inherently saying in that is that there's something wrong with it, right? That instead of, which when you say it like that, it makes so much sense. But I think a lot of people who are of the, my kids we don't see color, right, are of the mindset that that's the thing that makes them not racist. When in fact, it's the opposite.
Yeah, it's racist. Because if let's say your child is out with the Black child, and they're just playing and they're running around the neighborhood, and they, the ball goes over into a neighbor's thing, and the Black kid, your son is just like, oh, go get it, or go over to the neighbors and just grab it. I know them. Your son has just put this child in danger, right? So your children have to understand the lens, and you don't have to, I start by just saying, especially young children, it's so easy young children just notice differences, because that's really all they in the beginning. And they say babies notice race, but what they're really noticing is differences.
Yeah.
Somebody does not look like them. So that's how you can start talking about it. Oh, the skin is different, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, when we go outside, I get really red, you know, like I get really red in the summer, but they get really dark in the summer just because of this thing called melanin. Like, it's so easy to explain. So I want you to ask yourself, why is it so hard for you to have these conversations? Because it's actually a very easy thing. It gets a little tricky when you start coming up on the police brutality, and you start coming up on why that Black child might get targeted in school and not this child. But
Right.
There's resources out there that can help you have these conversations. A lot of them, actually.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully this will be a tiny little piece of those resources, because, you know, we're having the conversation now. And, you know, to the extent that I can, because as you said, this is something that those of us who are white parent coaches, white people in this space have to be promoting the idea that we have these conversations. So for everyone who's listening, let you know, hear me say now, these are conversations that we have to be having with our children. And if you are a white parent, we need to step into those conversations in the same way that Black parents do, because Black parents don't have the option to not have them. Right. And so we need to approach this from the perspective that we don't have the option either, because we can't build a safer world for all of our children if we're not having these conversations.
Pretending stuff it's a pretending too, because we all know. Come on.
Yeah.
Nobody's we're watching the news. Like we all know. And you can use the media. You can use the media to have these really tough discussions. And and to bring it back to the coaching industry, what I'm noticing is folks started talking about conscious parenting in a really shallow way. And it took out the communalism. It took out the fact that we're here to protect one another. We're again, it's really just gentle parenting that's being called conscious parenting. And a lot of people have adopted social justice language, but they're not. You can't, you know. I'm not going to name any names, but I had someone, a white parent coach, like steal my words, promoting something with the word conscious. And I was like, you can't be conscious stealing from people. Like, what are you doing? And so it's really frustrating for me to see, like, please, at the end of the day, and this goes across any online creation, Black creators get paid exponentially less than white creators do. And I'm not exaggerating. You can get paid $12,000. I can get paid $250 on the same project. Like, that's how it's ridiculous. And so this person had all of this, you know, this content and all of these followers, hundreds of thousands of people, and I'm here with 24,000. And I put that up, I maybe get a few thousand, you know, I put up my words, I maybe get a few, you know, 100 likes or whatever. They had over 100,000 shares of my words. And I was just like, I didn't get paid for this. Like, it's so frustrating. So you're using conscious parenting, you're using the word conscious in a really disingenuous way, when really it's okay to just stay in your lane and talk about gentle parenting. Like, that's needed too.
Yep.
It's okay to just stay there. But when you dive into more consciousness, which is essentially wokeness, what people hate now, what you're doing is you're expanding this whole parenting thing to actually include the parents. Because what I felt when I first started doing this work was I didn't feel supported. Like, I'm a single parent. I didn't feel like people understood why I may lose my shit sometimes. Like, and because folks are so binary online, it's like, I can explain why, and people are like, that's not an excuse. And I'm like, I never effing said it was. I'm telling you what's going on, so we can be, so we can connect to one another and we can offer support to one another.
Well, and I mean, I don't know that we can start to shift those patterns of the way that we respond if we don't understand the why underneath it, right? It's the same as like with our children. I often talk about with my clients, like, let's understand their belief behind their behavior so that we can address that, right? And not just the same thing. And we need to understand that for us. So I want to sort of, because I love that you've led us back to this place of the gentle parenting and the conscious parenting, which I think conscious parenting is a phrase. The way you describe it is somewhat different than I think some folks think about it, because, right, you described it as bringing in the awareness of some of these social constructs and systemic challenges and issues. And I think, and I will admit, I'll put myself into this category. Dr. Shefali Sabari wrote a book called The Conscious Parent, which I have read, but I don't recall her bringing in some of those larger systemic issues, but maybe I'm misremembering, or has she narrowed it down further than
narrowed it down too? I mean, let's get to the point, like Dr. Shefali's, her audience is largely white. She now the thing I did like about her was she did talk about how the world will influence you, and that's essentially saying the same thing, but without specifically saying like, hey, colonization, white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism. On her page, she talks about that a little bit more. Conscious parenting really, to me, is a shift in really looking at parenting. Looking at the parents, how outside influences and stuff that's going on within me influences my parenting. So essentially what she was talking about as well.
Yeah.
And being conscious of that, right? But we can't say I'm conscious of this without discussing systemic issues. You just can't, because that plays a part in it. Now, someone that has a two-parent household that has a lot of familial help, that where the parents own the home and there's a backyard, that parent looks different. Now, there's a lot of abuse that happens in those types of households. We know that. However, if we're not talking about those people, we're talking about the folks who are really trying to be most likely first generation, like conscious parents or gentle parents.
Yeah.
They have privilege of just like, it's a lot of privilege there that I just named off those few things. Even the damn backyard is a privilege. Okay.
Yeah.
To be able to like send your kids off safely to play in the backyard. That's a big privilege that people don't think about. I don't have that privilege. I'm a single parent. I'm working for myself. So money is always up and down. And I don't have a backyard. I live in a condo. And so I'm always having to, we got to get dressed. We got to leave the house. That means I need gas in my car. That means I need to make sure I'm packing snacks all the time. And that costs money. Like there's a lot of systemic things that come up for me that may not come up for other people, that may make some roadblocks along the road of conscious parenting. It doesn't mean that I can't do it. It doesn't mean that there's any excuse when there's yelling, because that happens to me sometimes. It just means that there are things that may impact my ability to do it well. And if we start to look at things like, okay, well, what's impacting my ability? I ask all parents that, because even if you had all those things that I mentioned, there's still roadblocks for you somewhere. And you got to know what those are. That's where the consciousness comes in. It may not be systemic, but it may be, it may be. If you're an exhausted, a lot of two-parent households, both parents work.
Yep.
There's not enough time for the kids sometimes. Sometimes there's too many damn activities after school and everybody's exhausted. That's a systemic thing, because we're in our individual, there's no community. There's no community help. And capitalism is driving everybody into the ground. You're exhausted because you have to work so hard just to put a roof over your head. That is a systemic issue. It doesn't matter if you're making $300,000 a year. If you have to work and not see your kids, that's a systemic issue, because that's what's required in the United States, right?
Yeah.
And so having consciousness around that is what I'm talking about. And being able to hold space for the parents who may be it doesn't even matter where on the spectrum you are, being able to hold space for that parent and say, okay, I see why you're upset. I see why you are having a hard time controlling yourself. Let's not just talk about how to breathe, because that's not going to help me. It does, but it doesn't.
Right.
We now expand this and talk about, how do we disrupt these systems so we can all breathe?
Yes.
That's
Yes.
the point of conscious parenting.
Which is so important. And, I've heard it said, so our colleague, Casey O'Rourke, who's a parenting coach.
Oh, I was just in our podcast.
Oh, you were? I love.
Last week.
Oh my God. Okay. So Casey and I are great friends. We talk weekly, if not more often. And, one of the things I heard her say recently, we were doing a Facebook Live, and she said, parenting is like the self-improvement course that you never knew you were signing up for. Right.
Okay.
Which and that just, for me, that highlights the idea that you've been talking about, this idea that parenting, we think parenting is about the child.
Right.
And it really isn't. It's about us.
It's about us allowing, right? Or not even allowing, because I even don't like that word. We're just here. We're here to guide our children to be the best version of themselves they can be.
Yeah.
And that means we got to get out the way. So what within us might keep our children from being that, from being themselves, from really being able to explore their passions? Like it's us. It's our mindsets. It's our trauma. It's our socioeconomic status. Like if Gia wants to be this amazing artist, but I have no money, I'm going to have to be really creative with how I go about nurturing that, right? In different ways. So it really is us looking at ourselves and being like, what's going to get in the way of my child truly being themselves, loving themselves, feeling confident, and nurturing their passions? Because that's what it is. We get in the way. Our stuff gets in the way.
Does it ever? Does it ever? So let me ask you this question. I'd love to hear your take. So once we become more conscious and more aware that maybe, obviously you've listed off a number of systemic issues. And also, I don't think this would fall in the systemic issues, but the way that we were parented, for better or for worse, right? It is still systemic. Okay. Yeah. So obviously that impacts the way we respond, the way we learn to deal with stress, the way that we approach discipline, all of those things. So once we start to become more conscious, and I suspect, at least this is true for me, that consciousness is an ever evolving thing, right? There's always more awareness to build there. But once that consciousness starts to become a part of our lives, how do we then start to make the shift into changing our responses, right? And moving more into that sort of gentle parenting approach from a place of consciousness? Like, how do you guide people to do that? Because as you said, just telling them to breathe doesn't cut it.
A lot of us are so disembodied. Like a lot of us really, I know I am. This is that why I say it's systemic, is because a lot of the way that we think of ourselves as failures when we're trying to do this, a lot of the failure is systemic failures. The time that we don't have, the patience that we don't have, a lot of it, if you start really digging into it, is connected to systemic failures of capitalism and patriarchy, right? And so a lot of, when you look at the white capitalist patriarchy over the course of the past 500 years, the point was to disembody you. You're not supposed to feel nothing. You're not supposed to, specifically for Black parents, you're not supposed to feel. You have to be out here being enslaved and being tortured, and you can't feel, because if you feel, then you might go mad, or you might try to run away. The whole point was to beat that out of you. And even for everyone, non-Black people, white people, and non-Black people of color, there's still a level of disembodiment that's required to live in the white capitalist patriarchy. Because again, if you feel too much of it, you're like, this is wrong, and we need to figure out how to fight against this, right? Yeah. So that rebellion that is beat out of a lot of us, was yelled at a lot of us, our parents did that to us. They experienced that from their parents, who also felt the same, who needed to just not feel.
Yeah.
And so that's why I say it's systemic. The first part is becoming more embodied, and that's the hardest part. It is
Yes.
breathing, but it's more.
Yeah.
So listen, I don't know her name, and if I find it, I will send it to you. I just happened to come across it on TikTok, and she said one of the first ways that you can start being more embodied is by listening to your body's senses. When you're thirsty, drink some water. When you have to use the bathroom, go use the bathroom.
Yeah.
When, like starting very simple, because a lot of us, oh my gosh, even last night I was just like, I gotta pee. And I did not want to get up.
Oh, I'll sit at my desk for hours.
Hey,
because I like
it. You have to,
God forbid I walk a minute down, 30 seconds down the hallway to go.
But that's what we do, right? We ignore our body cues, and we don't even know we're like, it is a systemic thing, but it's also us just trying to survive. It's us shutting off a part of our nervous system. Yeah. And so to put that back online takes a lot of work and a lot of courage, because once you start feeling things, listen, I stopped drinking for a little bit because I was recognizing my family has a history of alcoholism. And I was noticing that I was using it to cope more than I was like happy with. And so I was like, I'm going to take a little hiatus from the drinky drink and just not drink.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I was
then you feel everything.
I had tears in my eyes. I'm just like, I hate this, because you realize how much stuff you stuff. You just stuff, or you drink away, or you watch TV, or you scroll, you doom scroll because you don't want to think. So when you stop the noise and the stuff starts coming up and you have to feel that, it's very, very hard. And but that is freedom. Like, you learning to be with yourself and feel those things is because you got to teach your kids how to do that. So if you're not willing to do it, how are you going to teach your kids how to do that, right? Yeah. You keep saying like, feel your feelings. You're not even feeling yours, sis. You're over here scrolling, so you don't feel anything. So you're distracting yourself in various different ways. So that to me is one of the first steps, is becoming more embodied, listening to your body. Yesterday, I had to just sleep. I had a lot of work to do, but after a 3-day weekend, I'm exhausted. I'm a solo parent. Gia is very high touch. I have sensory issues. I have ADHD, and it is just like a sensory nightmare for me. Like, I'm at home and I'm tense and I'm hypervigilant. I can't rest. It's a lot. So when she went to school, a sense of relief washed over me so I could actually rest. And for some people, that's hard to hear. Like, oh, you were so relieved to be away from your child. Yes, I was. So I could get some goddamn rest. I'm exhausted. And I need to just be by myself for a minute. And the way that we make parenting like we're martyrs, you don't have to like parenting all the time, friend. You don't to be on all the time. Yeah. It's okay for you to have what I call just keep everyone alive days, and you just do the bare minimum, low energy days. So because if I try to do anything today, everybody getting it. Somebody getting kicked out the house. Okay. So if you're like that, that's the consciousness. You got to prepare for that. So I know that if I didn't rest yesterday, that yesterday night would have been a nightmare for Gia. I would not have been a good parent. And so we have to be like, okay, what do I need right now? How do I take care of myself in order for me to be a good conscious parent just today? Okay. We're not talking about tomorrow. And sometimes you only got 50%. And if you gave 50%, you gave 100%. Okay. Yeah. So I think it was Casey who said she has to go with the 70-30, ratio here.
Yes.
I'm just trying to survive over here, and I want to get to a place of thriving. But right now I'm not necessarily thriving. I am in survival mode because I don't have support.
Right.
And when you're an unsupported parent, conscious parenting is very, very difficult. So you got to feel that though. And I have to be honest about that, because if I'm not honest about that, then how can I get support?
Oh my gosh. That just feels like you just dropped like truth bomb after truth bomb, sort of little wisdom nuggets, because I think it stems from that idea that I so appreciate you calling out. Look, I love my children. I know you love Gia, and I don't love every minute of every day of being a parent, right? Even those of us who work in this space don't, right? We don't, and it's okay to acknowledge that.
I mean, we have to. And the reason why we have to is because if we start to look at what parts am I struggling with? See, that's what I'm saying. When we get to the roots of stuff, just saying that is not enough, right?
Yeah.
I'm happy that we can start acknowledging that and people are able to have these conversations. But then when you start to ask, what parts of it are very unenjoyable for me? You gotta just be honest. Even if you're just writing in your journal, right? Because then you can say that's what you need support with. And the problem is that we are not used to being in community with one another. That's the way forward. I know I just bought my little land, y'all. And my point of buying that land is I'm trying to have like a little small intentional community with some more single mothers. Come bring your little tiny home and park it with your child, and my child can play together and we can help each other out. Because what exhausts me about parenting is all the caring, all the care tasks.
Yeah.
Because it's not just, I can't just sit and enjoy my child. She also got to eat a bunch of times. Okay. It's expensive.
Imagine that.
Like, what's going on? Why are you always hungry? She has the stomach of a 15-year-old football player. I'm like, why? You're hungry again, girl? Like, what's going on? You got to eat all the time. I got to clean up. I have to make money. I have to figure out how to get the laundry done, the dishes done, like all of these care tasks. I cannot do them alone.
Yeah.
That's why they don't get done. That's why my sisters will walk in and be like, what's going on with your house? Girl, I can't today or tomorrow. I just got to let it go for now. But so ask yourself that. If parenting, because some people are just like, I just love parenting. Oh, I'm so happy for you. I don't all the time. And I don't feel bad about saying it. I just don't.
I don't either. I love my children. I'm so glad I'm a parent. I love talking about parenting and learning about it and guiding parents.
It's not a cakewalk.
Right. But part of that is acknowledging, I think this is the hardest job that anybody can be given. You don't get a day off. Yeah.
There's no vacations.
Yeah.
When we're on vacation, we're thinking about them. We're making sure they're okay. It is a lot for our bodies. And we can, I can look back and I can see why my mother struggled with alcoholism, why her mother did. My grandmother started having children at 14 years old. My mother had me at 19, And so I can see, because you're so young and you don't have a lot of support, why certain things happen. That doesn't excuse the abuse. It doesn't excuse the things that happened to me. What it does is let me see her as a human being.
Yes.
We humanize parents, because then I can say, wow, she just really needed more support, right? She needed more people around her to help her raise 3 girls. Because it was 3 of us, and that's a lot. It's a lot of hair. You got to do hair all the time, right? Yeah. So it's a lot, and then it's very expensive. We were very poor growing up, so it's like I see why you want to escape in alcohol. Like I see that, I understand it, and I hope that that we can all look back and just figure out, how do we humanize people? I'm not talking about excusing abuse. I'm gonna say that again, because folks go there. Right. I'm not saying it's ever okay, but there is a reason for everything. I do not believe that most people are inherently evil or bad.
Right.
I believe that what happens is we get so unsupported that we do end up taking things out on our children sometimes.
Yeah.
And historically, children were the thing, like they were the property. You get to just do whatever the hell you wanted to your child. And this was up until like the 1910s. Children were going out and working and going to bars and whatnot. So like, start looking back in history, you realize what we do with our children now is so different than what was historically done with children.
Yeah.
And the reason why we exist as parent educators is because of colonialism and how colonialists, I don't even know that's the word, saw children as property, as people who just were born to work for them, and to create wealth, especially boys. And the girls were there just to carry on go get pregnant and have some more kids to help carry on the name. Like, you start looking into history and you're like, oh, this is ugly, the way children were treated, and still are, but back then it was really, really bad.
Yeah.
And so we have to care about the history. We have to care about the roots, because then we can start to make real, actual systemic change.
Yolanda, that feels like a perfect note to end on, just the idea of how we make these real systemic changes for your children, for my children, for all of our children. And I know we could talk for hours more, and I hope we get to do it again in the future. But we'll end there. For folks who are listening, to connect with Yolanda, all of her, her Instagram, her webpage, all of that stuff, her Patreon, all is in the show notes. She sends out, I just want to call out, she sends a fabulous newsletter out that I love the structure of it, that she uses. I'm going to let you subscribe and be surprised with the way she puts her newsletter together. And I highly recommend you follow her, especially if you are a white parent who has some learning to do. Yolanda, thank you so much for being a part of the Heartful Parent Podcast. I love every time we get to talk, and I look forward to doing it again in the future.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Yolanda. I know that I did. I learned a lot from her, and I love how sprinkled throughout she just sort of dropped little truth bombs, little wisdom nuggets, like good stuff for us to sort of take away. And again, in that space of curiosity, from that space of learning and respect, to think about, to grow from, to learn from, and to ask ourselves the question, what do we need to be doing in our families and in our communities, with each other, to support parenting in a different way and ultimately support a better space for us all. I think Yolanda does a beautiful job of talking about that, explaining that. And I'm so grateful that she gave of her time, her energy, and her expertise with us on the podcast. I hope you will look her up. As I said in the podcast, her newsletter is fantastic. Her Instagram is fantastic. Follow her, like her in all the places. And most importantly, learn from her and then do better. Right? We all need to do more, do better, and keep building that world where our kids grow up brain safe and body safe. On that note, I'm going to sign off for the week. I look forward to seeing you again next week with another great episode of the Heartful Parent Podcast. If you would do me the great honor and the great favor of dropping a 5-star review wherever it is that you listen to podcasts, and even better yet, sharing your thoughts, why you're giving it 5 stars. Not just the star rating, but your endorsement, your testimonial is always so helpful in making sure more people find the podcast. I appreciate you. I appreciate the work that you do to raise your families and the children in your lives, and I will see you next week. Cheers.